he actually deals with the subject of akhlaq within the theological discourse on ethics. So he sort of takes off his hat as a popular preacher, puts on his hat as a theologian dealing with ethics, and writes at a very different level, and in a very, you discover that what he believes is that first it's good to bring the lay people to in the habit of certain pietistic practices, but then once they get into the habit, they start maturing into learning meaning of these practices, and ultimately they they gain substance and their consciousness elevates. In his book Al-Akhlaq, for instance, he says that things like their thawb and so on becomes irrelevant. That while Ghazali says, the haram and halal never becomes irrelevant, but the adab become. So what is the role of adab? The role is adab is a hook to get lay people into the habit of thinking into habit of thinking of God, and then their consciousness is elevated, and then they move from adab to true akhlaq or true ethics, which in Ghazali's paradigm he sees only possible within a mystical intuitionist paradigm. Now, of course, you're right, and when the Wahhabis come in and they tap into an authority like Ibn Taymiyyah or Ghazali and quote these parts without, sometimes out of real ignorance, just because they themselves just haven't read that much in theology, without any type of contextualization and sort of acting like the opposite manifestation of Islam bashers. Islam bashers take the superficial and shove it down your throat, and these guys take the superficial and shove it down your throat. Both of them are. Now, my own personal, I think that it is not a creation of a new tradition that is required, but a return to bluntly saying that adab and akhlaq are two different things, and that you guys are basically what you're talking about are adab, which might be actually good manners or not, depending on the cultural context. And I, of course, my own feeling is that there has to be theological and juristic responses to preserve the integrity of the lived Islamic experience. In other words, the authenticity of Islamic culture. But the role of the Muslim theologian or jurist is not to come and define that culture, but to protect it, preserve it, so that the lived Islam, which is Islam that thrives through the centuries, the Islam of the people on the street, is guarded against these puritanical onslaughts. And here I don't think that either a purely I don't think like a Western Western intellectual discourse would be at all sufficient. Part of what I do, if Greece actually has some of this material, like the literature that I've seen that the Wahhabis have produced about me, because as you know, I went to Indonesia and Malaysia and went all around it many times and so on. Is they often I have all these essays and emails and stuff that sometimes people have leaked to me that say, never engage him, just avoid him because he's dangerous. He will bring up evidence and don't take him lightly. Just don't engage him. I mean, Grace has this stuff. It's really funny. I mean, it's really, they talk. And then I think, but that in itself is an indication to where the response must be. I mean, I know many of my teachers who kept quiet. Why they kept quiet? And they kept quiet, frankly, because of financial need. Like one of my teachers who his silence was bought at a price of about $1 million. Okay, and one of the biggest disappointments of my life is. But in a situation where people are truly financially in miserable conditions, I mean, especially the status of theologians and jurists today, it is hard to come in and say, just ignore the possibility of hard currency that comes by the way that peers have. And at the same time, the attacks by Islam bashers makes people say, well, let's not create fights between Muslims. Let's try to first respond to the Islam bashers and then worry about putting our house in order if we ever get to it. I think that we go back to this question of philanthropy, and I think there are a lot of Muslim jurists and theologians who can bring back this tradition into the forefront to push against the Khawarij of today. But they need philanthropic Muslim support, because otherwise, you're asking them to do so while starving, which is not practical. And anyway, we should talk more about that, because this is something that ultimately we are in a time. We come at a time in history where we can affect trajectories, and that's not for every generation. Not every generation can affect the trajectory of something, and I think that creates an obligation, and not an obligation for everyone to become a theologian or a jurist, but an obligation to be aware of what areas need development, and what areas are sort of false roads. Like, for instance, Fatima Mernissi or Muhammad Arkoun or an Irshad Manji, or all of these sort of self-hating Muslims. I think they're all false roads. They're people that come. In fact, they encourage the Wahhabi cause because people see the alternative, and the alternative are these people who,
who don't seem Muslim.
Or don't seem Muslim,
really.
Even.
I mean, to a lot of people.
Except just by label, yeah. And so then people say, oh, well, between these and these, we'll take the Puritans. So, we went over time, but okay. So tomorrow, Amru Ma'ruf and Nahy Anil Munkar, and I'll try to encourage you to ask. Because very important part is responding to your own questions and so on, and I'll try to encourage you to do that early on so we can. All right, I'll see you guys tomorrow.
I actually won't be here tomorrow, but I'll be back on Wednesday. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Well, it's.
But it sounds like it will be interesting.
Yeah, you can follow it on. You can go on the web and.
We're going to. They're doing broadcast
No, we're recording it and will be uploaded, I think, tomorrow morning.
Ah, okay. So every day will be like the next
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so you can.
So tomorrow the two of us.
Well, how about your friend is?
He will follow, but he has an appointment tomorrow to go some medical checkup and like that.
So you don't take it
It's
from
the same.
tomorrow.
It's the same.
Okay,
thing.
well, the two of us.
The only reason I'm going to do is the same thing. I have all these appointments which clash.
Oh,
with this.
Yeah, that's well, I mean, I wonder if it's just, you know, a small number, whether it would make sense to just meet in my office and, you know, sort of, it feels just
Better
it feels more, yeah, better, right?
Yeah. I think so.
So I'll ask Grace. Tomorrow, tomorrow the only two people who are gonna be able to come because to have doctor's appointments. So I wonder if you could just meet in my office. It would probably be.
Okay, so see you Wednesday.
All right.